Okay. We're now going to continue talking about the High Classical period, and I'm showing you here a bust of the Emperor Hadrian as a general who was chosen to be Trajan's successor. He was also a fellow Spaniard, and here we can see a very different type of Roman emperor. Hadrian was a lover of Greek culture. He spoke Greek, traveled to Greek often, and in fact traveled throughout the empire. And this was a period where expansion really comes to a halt. And under Hadrian, there's going to be a real emphasis on the cultification of culture. Here we see him wearing the Hellenistic beard, right? And this becomes very fashionable for successive emperors, evoking the association with Greek antiquity. As on his cuirass, here we can also see the battle scenes of men fighting in the nude, which also was a Greek practice, not something that the Romans took up. So here we see in the bronze him affecting his love of ancient Greece. He also, did you have a question? Well, anything that's influenced by Greek, because Hellas, right? The Greek region was called Hellas, and so when something is Hellenized, it falls under the Greek influence. Okay? This isn't late Roman. I basically broke it up. This Hadrian is still considered the High Classical period. Okay? Well, we'll start to see, I'll show you. It begins to start to change. So this is kind of like on the border, okay? But Hadrian had traveled very widely, and he was particularly interested in the great region of Egypt. And he is going to be inspired by what he sees in Egypt when he goes to build his large private villa in Tivoli, which is outside of Rome. The Romans were the first to invent the villa, or the escape from city life, and many of the elites had these large country estates built for themselves. And Hadrian's was one of the most celebrated of all of these country estates, and it was just enormous. Had a large library, gymnasium, a bath structure there just for his use. But perhaps the most widely represented aspect of his villa was this grotto area that he designed himself. He was inspired by his travels to Egypt, and he built the grotto, which he called Canopus and Serapeum. The names are a bit odd. The Canopus section is this architectural region here. Canopus was a city that was connected to the ancient city of Alexandria by the Nile. And this is actually a long, narrow pool, but is meant to evoke the Nile River by naming this structure the Canopus. On the far side is kind of a odd-shapen building, often described as pumpkin-shaped, which is called the Serapeum, which is basically reminiscent and influenced by the Temple of Serapis, which was an Egyptian temple that Hadrian had seen when he had traveled there. Serapis was an Egyptian kind of hybrid god that was kind of a conflation of Horus, Isis, and another figure. And during this period in Greece, we're going to see a kind of a fascination with kind of cult religions that begin cropping up. Egyptian gods were one, and of course Christianity, another one of these cult religions. What is interesting about this structure is that Hadrian designed it himself. The Serapeum pumpkin shape, it's hard to really see from the slide, was made of concrete, the only material possible to build such an odd-shaped building. Interestingly, also, what we see here in the Canopus is this colonnade, right? We recognize this, obviously, example of Hellenization, right? The Corinthian columns laid out. But interesting, the lintel above that doesn't support anything is just decorative. We see a lintel and then an arcaded form here, and then a straight lintel, and then another arch. So we see the incorporation of this Roman building element with the Greek, which is kind of part of the synthetic quality, eclectic quality, if you will, of Roman architecture. Something like this we wouldn't see in the Greek world, where form and function had to be one of the same. This is just a decorative embellishment. Yeah. Well, the Serapeum is named after, it's believed, the temple of Serapis, which he had seen in Egypt, which is no longer around. Serapis was this kind of Egyptian deity that had aspects of Horus and Isis. It was kind of this fusion, and we start to see like a lot of these kind of interesting religions emerge around this period and then become embraced in Rome. Also, Middle Eastern gods become interesting, and then the whole connection with Canopus is a bit weird. He calls it the Canopus after the city that is connected between Alexandria by the Nile, and that this doesn't look like a city at all, but it's just the kind of allusion, I think, to the Nile River, which had important qualities for Hadrian because his favorite lover, a young man of extraordinary beauty, was killed by drowning in the Nile, and he became desolate and unconsolable, and the Nile kind of plays this important role for Hadrian. I want to kind of move outside of Rome for a minute and talk about the broader empire that was going on. This was one of the kind of largest moments of the Roman world. And I want to show you the extraordinary building called Al-Khazneh, or the Treasury, which is found in the city of Petra in Jordan, which at the time was part of the Roman Empire, which expanded all through the West, up into Great Britain, down into the Middle East, including Jordan. And this is an extraordinary site. The region was controlled by a group of people called the Nabateans, who were extraordinary traders and merchants who basically served as the brokers for the Arabic or desert peoples in the Middle East who would bring in their wares from the desert, and then Petra was kind of a trading post in which it would then be on-sold to the Romans. And it's the Nabateans that built these extraordinary buildings in this deep crevasse. And you can see here what's so extraordinary is that they've taken the classical architectural vocabulary, and they basically have used it, carved it out of the sandstone that make up the walls of this extraordinary place. You can see that they've used the Corinthian order here. Unlike, a Roman, it's a bit wonky, right? You can see the bending of that column there with an elaborate entablature above. Up here, and these are all just carved into solid stone, and then you go in here and it's a very small kind of dark space. And here we see this fantastical architectural of kind of an undulation of these structures here with this deep indention here, and then this rounded form here, which is how the structure gets its name of the treasury. It was believed originally that that held treasure, and then later Bedouins came through and shot at it and trying to release the treasure. My husband recently was in Jordan for a long period of time, and so I had him take some photos while he was in Petra. And it's not just the treasury, that's just one building of a large city within this canyon. And here are some other structures from it. And this is now, it's still a place where, lots of tourists, if you go to Jordan, everyone goes to Petra because it's, so extraordinary. And they have, the Bedouin people now have lots of shops set up and you can buy stuff there. But you can look into the walls of the canyon here. The Nabateans had large kind of storage facilities, and this is what these rounded forms are, were places to store all of the wares that they would then on-sell to the Romans. And you see other examples of these cool kind of carvings into the side. Interestingly also, at the site, the Romans actually built the whole Roman area there as well, separate from the Nabateans. They couldn't just crush them because they needed their contacts and their connections to make the whole trading thing happen. And here is from the Roman section where the Romans lived, kind of right down the road, right within the canyon. A theater space, and you can see up in the benches where the theater was built to hold entertainment that the Romans had become so accustomed to. So kind of interesting. Also gives you an idea of just the extraordinary expanse of the Roman world and how incredibly influential the culture becomes. By far and away, the most significant building that is erected during Hadrian's reign is the Pantheon. This extraordinary structure, one of the only structures that remains from the classical world from the Roman period. Most of the other buildings were destroyed. The Pantheon was built by Hadrian as a temple to all the gods. And here we can see the two parts of the building, the Hellenized portico, right, with the recognizable Corinthian columns and entablature, and then behind it, the more Roman architectural structure, the huge concrete rotunda. With the large dome shape spanning 142 feet across, making it the largest dome ever erected in the classical world. I want to look inside of the Pantheon, and these slides don't give it any justice at all. If we weren't on a especially fast day, I would show you some film clips of it. Maybe you can check that out on your own. You can see when you look inside the huge oculus above. Oculus means eye, and this open space is the only source of light for the huge room. The dome is built to be at one huge sphere, which would accommodate, it was 142 feet tall and 142 feet wide, thus creating a large circle within the huge dome space. We've seen, right, precursors to this in the Doma Aurea, that octagonal dining room of Nero, and here it is on an extraordinary scale that only the Romans could possibly come up with. We see here the 5 courses of coffers, and these are those sunken panels. And the way they were actually able to construct this was the way they played with the recipe for the concrete. The lower sections of the dome were of a much heavier mix with a denser stone, a heavy stone. And as they move up towards the top levels here, they mixed it with pumice stones. It was a really light, pumice, like that volcanic light stone. So the actual material was much lighter. And then they have the equivalent of the keystone, this capping stone around the oculus in the center that kind of connected and then distributed the weight evenly throughout. This was only made possible because of this experimentation with the concrete. In the ancient world, the coffers, which you can see here, they not only they make a decorative interior, but they were also necessary for carving out the weight of the actual ceiling itself, right? And then they painted them blue colors, and then they had a gold kind of medallion in the center, which would be making the association with the kind of celestial heavens. And then they would be lit up by the sunlight coming in. It's still kind of dark inside the Pantheon, even though it has a large oculus. It's still a rather dark space. Maybe Fyodor, you might get there on a really bright day. But Leo, you were recently there, and it was. Did you have a sunny day? I was there. Yeah, still dark. It is. It is. Yeah. It just makes you realize like how overwhelming it would have been in the ancient time. You can see here in the niches that were built, now they contain Christian statuary, but at the time they would have had the statues of the various Roman gods. And we see here the kind of play here between the triangular pediment and then the arched, rounded form here, and then this pattern is repeated around the interior. Then they have the two pilasters on either side, and then these huge weight-bearing Corinthian columns that hold up this kind of entablature, and then from which that huge dome springs. Yeah. You just get wet. There's a massive mosaic floor underneath. We see the array of different precious marbles and stones that were used. As it's explained on the video, these were taken from all over the Roman Empire. Porphyry in particular, this extraordinary striated stone, was used widely in the Pantheon. Yeah, Matt. Well, the whole, this is something that was used widely. The whole idea of the gods being from up in the celestial sphere, used kind of over and over. Yeah.
So they replaced the Roman gods, or they just?
Well, they basically incorporate. They were taken. Yeah, because remember, Rome is going to be sacked. We're gonna, and the barbarians are kind of running in here and just pillage and take everything, but they left the Pantheon. Well, because it's had a long history. It's come over the domain of the Christian church. It's functioned, and this has happened over and over and over again. So if you're interested in that, you can take the 1B class, and that's basically what we talk about, particularly during the Renaissance, is the kind of incorporation. And we'll see that today even with the baths, how the baths of Diocletian are basically a Christian church today. And that's the thing about Rome. It's just layers upon layers of history. Etruscan monuments under, Roman, and then the Christians come in, and, it's kind of overwhelming. So different than our own world. Yeah, Leo, did you have any other comments from your experience, recent experience? Yeah. Let's look at the exterior one more time. There you can see the big drum of the hemispherical area in the back there. What's interesting, though, is you can see this is sometimes has been kind of identified as marking the kind of beginning of the decline of the Roman Empire. If you look here, you can see that originally that pediment, right, was meant to exist higher up. And it is believed that these massive columns would intended originally to be even larger. That something had happened, perhaps, and they decided to downscale it and form a lower portico, and they just kind of went with that rather than insisting on maintaining the proportions as conceived by the original builders and architects. This kind of shift, right, or willingness to just kind of ad hoc here and not maintain the original plan has been identified by some architectural historians as kind of the beginning of the Roman decline, if you will, okay, beginning at this phase. After Hadrian dies, he is succeeded by the Antoines, led by Antonius Pius, who at the same time was, when he was named Roman emperor, he was required to then appoint his successor, who was Marcus Aurelius. When Antonius Pius dies, this pedestal was commissioned by his sons to celebrate his apotheosis, which is basically his ascent into the heavens. And this is basically a base, the base of what would have been a larger column. And here we can see the apotheosis taking place. There's Antonius Pius and his wife Faustina, who are moving upward on the wings of this central figure, very classically idealized. We see Rome herself personified by this female figure, and on the left we see the Campus Martius, the military grounds, personified with this man holding in his lap a very large obelisk. Of course, pillaged from the Egyptians, having also a very phallic role here. Interestingly, we see this representation of the apotheosis on one side. The other side of this column base, we see, or pedestal, we see the discursio, which is, sorry, this is the discursio, which is basically when writers would encircle a funeral pyre of a soldier or the deceased. What's interesting to us here is just kind of how differently these two scenes are rendered, okay? So there it is. I want to show them side by side. And here's that's kind of a worse slide, but what do you make of this? Same pedestal. Stylistically, what do you mean step backward? How so? Where? What side? Okay, we see the use of aerial view, right? This is the central scene in the middle, and what we're seeing are riders circling around, right? We're now kind of in aerial view, right? Good. What else? Phil? Yeah, aerial view sighting. Also the ground line, you mentioned that. Look, they just make another ground line here and then little tiny ground lines underneath the feet of the horses, right? So we have no kind of consistent single viewpoint here, right? What else? How else? Yeah, Angela. Okay, good. I agree. Yeah, more skilled, you might say. Yeah, Leo? Yeah, it's hard to really read the one on the right? You can't really figure out what's the most important here. We're clearly identified, right? Our eye is drawn to the center of this. We have a very clearly, we can talk about this in terms of kind of composition, right? The symmetrical quality of this composition, how we have, these two personifications kind of on either side, then this clear diagonal moving through the center, and then we can see, the key figures up above. On the right, it's just kind of an all over the place kind of compositional format, right? It's difficult to really read it. We've got those competing points of view. Also, the figures themselves aren't articulated in any clear way. They're almost like doll-like, right? And scripts. I mean, the horses themselves are clear, but there's no kind of sense of individuation. It's so busy, right? What we start to see here in this late empire, which had been traditionally considered like the decline of the Roman artistic tradition, now is presented a little bit differently, thinking that maybe the Romans were becoming influenced by other sources that they hadn't been in the past. Perhaps the work of the lower classes were something that were becoming interesting to court artists, rather than just kind of blowing off the late work as representative of a larger kind of artistic and cultural decline. That it's more complicated than that. Yeah.
How well did like the Romans keep track of like information and like recorded works and everything? Because it's like maybe they learned a bunch of stuff, and like because their empire lasted for so long in the later period,
Yeah.
there was just stuff that they forgot how to do.
Yeah, you mean in terms of what was the kind of tradition of teaching? There was usually the large groups of imperial artists that would work under the, and here we see, these were done at the same time. So it's like a choice was made, right? A kind of a different set of interests and influences. So you just can't say, they just didn't know that other things are at play. And we're going to see this kind of again. When basically the Antonius Pius is going to die and Marcus Aurelius is going to take control. He is going to rule from 161 to 180. He's going to spend a lot of his life basically patrolling the borders of Rome. The barbarians are going to be constantly attacking the empire. He is going to have success in the Great British Isles. He's going to claim Great Britain as his own. We see here in this equestrian statue, he is rendered in the mode of Hadrian, right? He's wearing that Hellenized beard. In fact, Marcus Aurelius was an intellectual and a philosopher. He wrote a philosophical treatise or meditation in Greek that was published. And here we see him, by wearing the beard and the curly hair, representing himself as a philosopher and intellectual. We see him equestrian, sitting on a horse. These equestrian statues were widely rendered through the Roman world of the emperors. This is the only one that survives. The others have been melted down and lost. And this one survives because it was believed originally that this was the Roman Emperor Constantine, who was the first emperor to convert Rome into Christianity. Thus, when the Christians emerge as the power source, they are going to keep this, thinking that it was a representation of Constantine. We see, interestingly, Marcus Aurelius rendering himself as an intellectual. We can see the borrowing of pre-existing Roman imperial techniques influence here, such as the portrait of Augustus with the orator's arm outward. Unlike Augustus, he is not wearing his armor. He wears regular clothing. This is his association of himself as a thinker, as a philosopher. Interestingly, it is believed in the classical period that there was actually the body of an enemy who was cowering underneath the foot of the horse. This could be that he is then pardoning that figure, or he is unnecessary to wear the military garb because it is evident from the enemy being crushed underfoot. And of course, we've seen that over and over again. The work is huge, right? It's over 11 feet high, 11'6", massive in scale. He is also, this is meant to aggrandize the emperor, as we'd expect from the Roman world. Also, Marcus Aurelius is unnaturally big on that horse, and this is another means used by the artist to aggrandize his stature and make him seem kind of larger than life. He's relatively calm and cool. This works in contrast to the horse itself, which is quite animated, as that forehoof springs upward, ready to kind of spring the taunt body of the horse. We see the cool and calm and collected nature of Marcus Aurelius. This marks kind of the end of the high imperial period. The late empire will be marked by a series of warlords who are going to compete with one another for power. It's basically a power grab that's going to last for about 150 years, or we're going to see warlords really ruling for very short periods of time, then assassinating each other. It's a period of kind of instability. And Caracalla was one of these kind of figures, and here we see a shift that has occurred in the imperial sculpture rather than the kind of Hellenizing intellectual that we see in the representation of Marcus Aurelius in the tradition of Hadrian. Here we see this scowling, buzz-cut Caracalla meant to look intimidating and mean, and indeed he was. He did play the Roman game by commissioning a massive bath structure as a gift to Rome. Taking baths was one of the favorite activities of the Romans. In fact, by 300 AD, there's going to be 952 public baths in the city of Rome. Caracalla's baths were particularly well known because they were so massive. Outside of Rome, they were spread over 35 acres, absolutely massive. And it wasn't just you'd go to take a bath. It was a whole kind of tradition, a whole kind of ritual that one would undergo. And here are the ruins of it. They're just huge, and these baths are done on an immense scale. Our best representation of what the baths look like in the interior come from the baths of Diocletian, where this church has been constructed from the section which was the frigidarium, or the cold room within the bath. So it gives you kind of an idea of just how ornate these bathhouses were. Well, yeah. And they're just huge. Can you imagine 35 acres? And so here's to give you an idea of like how these were laid out. So they were massive, made of concrete, then faced with brick or other stone. The usual layout was the actual bathing section were placed in kind of a line. Where one would first kind of go into a pool area, an area for swimming or exercise, and would then enter into the frigidarium, which was the cold room, then into the tepidarium, and ultimately into the caldarium, which was the hot steam room. And these were huge rooms that took advantage of all of the vaults, the growing vaults that we see here, that allowed large clerestories, windows of light to add illumination into the space. So they were very bright, not the kind of dark area that we think of like the Pantheon, These were filled with light and elaborately decorated with beautiful mosaic flooring. And then also within these complexes were exercise areas like a gym today. So it's similar to like a very luxurious gym. And these would be open to the public for free or very, very small amount of money. On either side here, we see the palestra. These were areas where people could go to exercise. Boxing and wrestling were favorite activities by the Romans. Also, off those rooms were large libraries. So after you would undergo this process of bathing, the hot room, the cold room, the tepid room, the hot room, you could then go for a massage. They were attended to by, of course, the multitude of slaves that worked in these baths. And then you could go into the library and entertain yourself there. So it would be something that was practiced widely by Roman citizens. As I said, it was huge in scale. The ceiling here, 145 feet high. This all constructed with concrete to get this kind of vast sense of space. Very. It's really the Bath architecture that's going to ultimately inform the basilica, large-scale basilican architecture we're going to see at this time. Caracalla is going to live for a very short period, and here is a portrait of one of his many successors, Trebonius Gallus, an example of one of these warlords that rose to power for a very short time. It's really an interesting work. If we compare it to Augustus, which clearly this guy, Trebonius, is trying to allude to, but it kind of has a different effect, right? Carlos, what do you see? Yeah, he is. He's wearing boxing shoes. Yeah.
Yeah, but he's not wearing clothes.
No.
He's pretty proud of that.
Well, so we see a nude sculpture. What do we think of? The Greeks, right? So he's affecting the Greek tradition. But have you ever seen a Greek sculpture look quite like this? No, why not? It's not idealized, right? It's specific. And what kind of body is this? It's muscular, and kind of strange, right? So thick through the torso. And let's say compared to his head, what do you think? Yeah, right? Super strange. Yeah, the out of proportion arms, huge barrel chest, thick thighs, and then he's got this very specific boxing shoes on. And then his tiny head, and he wears that kind of sneering face, very specific with the growth. The effect being, of course, an intimidating brute, right? While he's basically recalling the classical tradition and everything that is associated with it, culture, and all of the corresponding ideals of the classical Greek world. It's very much a Roman interpretation of it, one that is meant to intimidate, to openly, an open call for power, right? It's a very kind of interesting kind of mixture of a lot of things, this kind of whole Roman, and it's also, this is of course part of this kind of later period where we see this shift away from the classical tradition of Roman art, okay? Trebonius is going to be assassinated shortly thereafter. And Rome is going to fall into a very tumultuous period where at one point they're going to set up a tetrarchy and have 5 rulers trying to rule the city at the same time. This, of course, falls apart. And ultimately, there's going to be a battle between 2 guys, Constantine and Maxentius, for rule over Rome. They are going to meet each other in 312 at the Battle of Actium, which is also known as the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. It's going to be a very important battle because Constantine is going to see a vision while he is fighting, a vision of a cross, a Christian cross, which he is going to credit with his triumph at this battle when he defeats his enemy and takes Rome as his own. He is going to accredit Christianity with his success, and he is going to legalize Christianity in 313, and then ultimately will convert to Christianity on his deathbed, which is extraordinary implications for the remaining of the Western world. Yeah, Matt, you have a question? Yeah. Perhaps. Oh yeah, but, you know, this is a part of a colossal sculpture. The head of this is 8 feet tall. Okay? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, 8 feet tall. It's a colossal sculpture. Just the head. So that might have something to do with it. They still have the finger, the hand of Constantine, and the foot. I'll show you. The colossal statue of Constantine sat right here within the apse of his massive basilica, the remains of which you're looking at on the right. Constantine is going to kind of outdo the rest of the Roman emperors, and he's going to do it with an extraordinary scale. Everything he does is going to be massive in dimension, all as a means of establishing his firm grip on power. You can see from his portrait that he returns to earlier precedent, foregoing the sneering militaristic face that we see in those warlords, here affecting the Augustan tradition of the eternally youthful face. We see a return to the kind of comma hairstyle, which was popular, called a comma hairstyle because they look like little commas on either side, associated with the Augustinian representational tradition. In his massive basilica, we can see that he has used 3 triple-bayed arches as a support to this humongous basilica, which, like the baths, this is basically derived from the architectural innovations of the baths, like those seen of the baths of Caracalla, with the huge clerestory of windows that the growing vaults, which we see here, allow. It's made of both of concrete and a brick. The exterior of it was faced in marble. There was a portico in the front with 4 massive columns. You would enter into it and then turn left, and you would see the huge statue of Constantine. Quite extraordinary structure. It was called the Basilica Novo.
What material did they use for the statue?
What's that?
What material did they use for the statue?
Oh, it has a brick core because it's so huge that they had to actually make it with, there's actually wood and stone core. And then I don't know. I don't remember what it's made out of, what the stone is, except that it had this kind of unique core. Maybe it was faced in marble, perhaps? I can look it up. Yeah, Matt. Sorry, Sean.
Do they have classified history?
I don't know. I was thinking the same thing as I was kind of coming up with this. I need to look that up, if it was paneled with glass or not. I'm not sure. Colored glass starts in the Byzantine Empire, but I think the Romans probably did know of glass. But I want to look it up for sure, because I was thinking, because you see windows, right? Yeah. Yeah, JW?
The book says it's a brick core, wooden torso, covered in bronze, the head and limbs.
Marble head and limbs. So what remains is the head, the hand, and those are they're copied widely through the history of art. Artists will become part of like the 19th century or the 18th century to visit Rome, and many artists are going to draw pictures of themselves next to the Constantine ruins and the face of Constantine and his foot or hand. Yeah. No, things are going wrong for him. Interesting question. What he's going to do is he's going to fell a lot of pre-existing buildings and then use those materials and reconstitute them in his own work. And we see this perhaps best in the fascinating Arch of Constantine. In fact, things are going so the barbarians are becoming so powerful that he's going to actually shift the seat of power from Rome to the eastern city of modern-day Istanbul, which he is going to call Constantinople, because it is so heavily fortified that he can secure the continuation of Rome there, and it will continue to exist as the Christian Roman Empire after Rome falls shortly, in just a few 50 years. Here is the Arch of Constantine that was, as you can see, a new level of decoration and illustration on the exterior of it. It's a triple-bayed arch covered in sculpture, functioning like a billboard extolling the achievements of Constantine. We see all sorts of different kinds of sculptural decoration. We see the traditional spandrels with the winged victory here, like we see on the Arch of Titus. We also see here the inclusion of these roundels that take different scenes from the life of Constantine. But very interestingly, basically, as we can see here, he begins pillaging pre-existing sculpture and reliefs from other monuments by other emperors, particularly the Hadrian's monuments, as well as Trajan's, that he is then going to just take and put into situ in his own arch. This practice of taking pieces from other pre-existing monuments and then adding them to your own, they are called spolia, S-P-O-L-I-A, where he would, let's say, take the head, which was the head of Trajan, remove it, and put his own face in its place. This kind of reconstituting, and we see that in the roundels. When he wasn't doing that, interestingly, he was basically copying scenes from pre-existing monuments. And here I am showing you a scene that he basically borrows from the Arch of Trajan. This is a panel which depicts the generosity of Trajan. We saw this before, remember, when we looked at Trajan's arch. Here is a similar scene represented on the Arch of Constantine. What do you make of it? Well, it's really, here is Constantine in the middle, right, handing things out. But it looks so different, right, Cole? Right.
It's still very impressive, but if you look at the one on the right, there's a lot more detail. That's where the emotion is a lot more, I guess, like better created.
Yeah. Phil?
Getting this feeling of desperation, all of the constant.
Well, it's also, I mean, traditionally that's what it was like. Oh, it just started, they just lost it. Obviously, it's kind of interestingly, right? I mean, I think of like our own culture and we basically, our whole notion in kind of a postmodern era, right? A pastiche of just grabbing from one and taking it from something else to create some whole new thing. This whole notion that there is nothing original anymore. In a way, right, we see here in this Roman late classical period doing the same thing, taking little bits from here, there, putting it together. It's a different kind of understanding of art, really, or of he is absorbing, if you will, the kind of tradition and power of these pre-existing emperors. Also, what we're going to see is the turn towards, he becomes a Christian and the influence of Christianity, which is a totally different set of values than presented in the classical world. No longer is the emphasis on the material world as we live it. The emphasis is on the spiritual world in the afterworld, really. And so what we're going to see, and we're going to see it more when we look at the Byzantine tradition, is the kind of abstraction from the everyday. The body will become less interesting, and we're going to see this turn towards flatness, dematerialized, and very schematic renderings of the body, which reflects the Christian spiritual emphasis rather than the human corporeal or bodily understanding of the world. Yeah.
It does seem like to a certain extent that Constantine would have had to have been pretty conflicted, because while he's simultaneously converting to this religion that is based so much on spirituality, he's building 8 feet tall statues of his head.
Right. In the tradition of all of the other emperors beyond, outdoing them to a whole new level, almost taking it to, it almost becomes absurd. But I think that's coming from my own age, right? That wasn't the intention, right? Yeah. It's hard to tell exactly who they are. Yeah, they all look the same, right? We don't get that sense of identification like we certainly do in the Areopagus or these kind of high classical monuments or Roman. They look more like types, right? Like little, than any specific individual. If that's just, part of the kind of abstraction process that's going on here. It's just a kind of an interesting transformation that occurs, that instead of just writing it off and saying that it's, a decline, that maybe, or this is an evidence of influence from the lower classes as well, which were never as, skilled, basically, as what we see from the imperial works, like we're seeing, in Trajan's column. Okay, Ashley. Yeah, the Discursio. Yeah. different emphasis.
Yeah,
Right.
trying to say something versus that one's just like, how many books have probably done that?
Okay.
It's boring after a while, and it's just, I don't know. It's weird to me to say that one's better than the other.
Yes.
Because you don't really, there's no
And
way to
people,
know.
yeah, you're absolutely right. I hope everyone's taken Ashley's point, and that's what really kind of a reassessment of how we speak about these things, that there's a different kind of value system going on and a different emphasis in the work on the left than what we see on the on.
When they get more religious with it, because they're going to get more stylized.
Yes, they are.
Characters, like more color and everything.
We're going to see that in Christian art because they're going to try and bring people to a spiritual state of ascendance rather than the interest on the classical human-oriented worldview. Okay, well, we'll talk more about that on Monday. So we did get out half an hour early. So enjoy your weekend. Don't forget to study, do your flashcards and all that stuff. Yeah, you too. And I need your papers if you haven't turned them in.